In November 2000, the TV show America's Most Wanted made an urgent plea for the whereabouts of a man on the run for murder. 8 years earlier, the same person had appeared on MTV as one of New York's up-and-coming rappers. Shy Ali was perfectly placed to become a rapper. As a teenager in the late 80s, early hip-hop pioneers like Queen Latifah and EPMD would be in his neighborhood in Co-op City in the Bronx. At a young age, he also made friends with Chris Lighty, who alongside Mona Scott Young created Violator Records. Lighty became like an older brother to him and would take him outside of Co-op City and let him see other parts of New York, and sometimes even let him in the studio. That was quite an important contact to have in hip-hop, to say the least. Chris was part of a loose collective known as Native Tongues. This group had members such as the Jungle Brothers, Tribe Called Quest, Black Sheep, and De La Soul, and genuinely focused on positive hip-hop. Lighty was the road manager for the Jungle Brothers, but one of them had their flight canceled from London to New York and wouldn't be able to make their upcoming show at the Apollo. So Shy Ali brazenly asked if he could freestyle and take his place. It was a bold move, and Shy Ali had to pretend that he wasn't scared to death of going up on stage. But he managed to pull this off, and Chris decided to sign him to Violator Records. Despite only being 12 years of age, Shy Ali appeared on Black Sheep's song Past the 40. At just 15 years old, he released his debut album, The Fabulous Shy Ali. The LP contained features that other rappers could really only dream about, such as De La Soul and Phife Dawg. The album did reasonably well, and he had accomplished more than most people at the age of just 15. Chris soon left the label, but Shy Ali was left on there, and it was clear that bigger and brighter things were on the horizon. But Chris's departure had its downsides. The label mostly focused on alternative rock, and Chris was their hip-hop guy. Meanwhile, Shy Ali's father was his manager and tried to negotiate a better contract for his son, and these financial issues escalated into legal disputes. One thing led to another, where Shy Ali had a second album, but for contractual reasons this album never got released. He was in limbo, where he simply wasn't able to release new music. The years passed and Shy Ali's rap career was starting to lose steam. The typical career progression, if you can call it that, is to go from drug dealing to rapping during this time. Shy Ali is one of the few rappers that went the other way. A lot of his friends were making good money hustling, and this was a way for him to make some extra money, although a lot of the time he was simply hanging out with drug dealers during their work shifts. Shy Ali got no formal notification that he was dropped from the label, but he just assumed that he was no longer wanted. And given the lifestyle he now led, he felt that it was sensible to own a gun. If he had to visit a neighborhood he wasn't too familiar with, or was in any situations where he felt he might be in danger, he would bring it with him for protection. But this form of protection ironically got him into harm's way. He was stopped by the police, and when they found the gun, he was put on probation. Right towards the end of his probation, he started carrying a gun again, and he got pulled over again and was re-given probation. During this time, he had a young daughter with his girlfriend Vicky. He was now under house arrest, so it seemed sensible to live with his daughter and girlfriend. And during this time, stuck at home, Vicky got pregnant again. With 4 people in the family, they needed a bigger place to live. And as luck would have it, Vicky's mother had an apartment she was no longer using. It was previously occupied by Vicky's brother Sean, who was currently in jail. And for a while, it was a nice and happy home. A year later, Sean was freed from prison. He came back to find his previous home was now occupied by a family of 4. He lived with them, but was now sleeping on the couch. There was unspoken tension in the air between Sean and Shy Ali. Firstly, Shy Ali was now living in his home, and naturally, living in a cramped house often causes arguments. Shy Ali would regularly provide him with some weed or coke, and Sean would often never pay him back for it. To keep the place a happy home, Shy Ali would often bite his tongue and not confront him about it. But there was tension bubbling up to the surface, and rather than straightening this out, Shy Ali moved to Harlem. While living there, Shy Ali would get a phone call that would change his life forever. Shy Ali received a call from Vicky and she was crying. Ali recalls that the issue was about buying milk and groceries for the kids. With Vicky crying, Ali asked to speak to Sean, but when he got on the phone, Sean was rather dismissive and said something along the lines of, "What do you care? You don't even live here." Ali didn't want to travel over from Harlem to pay for the milk and groceries, so just told Sean to give Vicky the money that he owes him. Sean replied and said that he doesn't owe him anything. They had a little back and forth on the phone, and the tension which was stirring between them was finally unleashed. They threw some words back and forth until eventually Sean tells Shai Ali the infamous words of, "Go SMD." Shai Ali drives out to the apartment full of rage, with his homie next to him. And of course, he was in an unpredictable situation, so he brought his gun with him. He reaches their home, but Sean is nowhere to be seen. To his disgust, the apartment his children are living in is pretty much in shambles. This dialed the rage he was feeling up another few notches. He drives over to a spot where Sean would normally hang out. He sees Sean and calls him. Ali pulls a gun upon him to scare Sean, but this has no effect on him whatsoever. Sean acts like he doesn't even care that he has a gun on him, perhaps even taunts him, so Shai proves that he isn't bluffing and pulls the trigger. He shoots the brother of his girlfriend and uncle of his children several times. After unleashing his rage, Shai Ali only had one thing on his mind. He needed to get the hell out of there, and fast. Shai Ali drove away from the scene and got rid of the gun. Later that night, he got a call on his cell phone explaining to him that Sean had died. The one thought in his head when he heard this was, "I gotta go." He had a trusted friend in Atlanta, so he took a long journey out from New York. Thankfully for him, Vicky lied to the police and didn't mention that Shai Ali and Sean were arguing. Shai Ali stepped foot inside a house in Atlanta and wouldn't leave this house for another 6 months. During this time, he would also allow his hair to grow and stop shaving. He eventually grew braids and gave himself more of a Rastafarian look, which was far removed from what he looked like before. Ali was living out of his friend's pocket, so at some stage, he needed to start earning a living. But he couldn't exactly pop into a Walmart with a resume, and there was no way that he could earn an honest living from here on out. And even hustling was still out of bounds. He wasn't in a position where he could hang around a street corner. And if the police caught him with even a small bit of weed, they might want to get some fingerprints. So he would sell drugs here and there, but a lot of his money came from robberies. He was already wanted for homicide, so he felt that 1 or 2 robberies wouldn't leave him in any worse of a situation. After a while, he felt like it was time for him to move out of his hideout in Atlanta. So to get a new place of his own, he needed to fake an identity. He learned about a nurse at a nearby hospital who had access to birth certificates they filled out when babies were born. They were essentially blank birth certificates that were certified by the hospital. She would secretly sell them to people who, for whatever reason, wanted to create their own birth certificate. And one of Shai Ali's friends gave him one of his kids' social security numbers. With this information, he could rent an apartment. And he now had an address, so he could get a driver's license and credit cards. He even bought his own gun legally through using all of these forged documents. He was a wanted killer on the loose, but found himself at a gun store, being told that he could buy as many guns as he pleased. He had been a wanted man in New York since January, but in November that year, he appeared on America's Most Wanted. His face was all over national television. There was not a single state where he would be safe now. He decided that he can't just stay in the same spot anymore, and continued moving around. But he started to get homesick for New York. Shai Ali began feeling fatigued from all of this hiding, considered going to Cuba, and perhaps a part of him even wanted to get caught. Whatever the reason, he kept coming back to New York. And in February 2001, America's Most Wanted aired him again. He was paranoid of every which way he went. Then one night he was staying in Parkchester. The moment he had anticipated for over a year was suddenly sprung upon him. At 5 a.m., he heard loud banging on the door. This was in a high-rise apartment. He looked out the window and realized it was far too high to jump. The jig was finally up. Shai Ali served an 11-year sentence at Sing Sing Correctional Facility in New York. His sentence, as you can imagine, gave him time to think. He simply got on with his life while living in prison. He got married to another woman while behind bars, and she actually gave birth while he was behind bars due to the conjugal visits he was allowed to have while inside. In 2012, he was a free man once again. And while his run from the law makes a good story, there are real people whose lives had been ruined and altered forever from this ordeal. Sean had a son who was only 11 or 12 when the killing happened and has had to grow up without a father. Shai Ali has a restraining order where he's not allowed to be in contact with him, but says he's incredibly apologetic and wants to pay him back in whatever way he can. And there's a wider issue at hand that he wants to address. Shai Ali wanted to get the word out that he's ashamed of what happened and wanted to be more of a positive role model going forward. He made a stupid lapse of judgment and doesn't want young men making the same mistakes. In an interview with Vlad TV, he talks about how young black men have anger issues and this needs to be addressed to stop history from repeating itself. He says, "We got issues. We have anger issues. We got pride issues. We got patience issues. And if it's not addressed, we take it out on each other. I don't understand why. I don't know why we take it out on each other all the time. Like it's sickening and sad." This seems to be more of a problem that's getting increasingly dangerous for young men in general as a whole, considering how many killings and shootings we've seen, at least in the United States, for people that are underage. But it's definitely a conversation worth having, if anything is to ever change, which doesn't seem likely in the near future.